Hello everyone. The title of my project or my paper is called How Do African American Youth Cope with Depression? An analysis of religiosity, counseling, and hobbies. Okay, so depression in African American youth is an under-researched topic. Um, when depression in adolescents or youth is researched, white youth are overrepresented or a majority of the participants in these studies. However, depression and suicidal rates in African American youth are increasing. Um, also, when depression is researched in African Americans, it's usually the sample size of participants are usually the majority older African Americans, um, and these research studies conclude that African Americans opt out of professional mental health services and utilize religion as a coping mechanism. So what I want to do is I want to um, focus on African American youth specifically because they are underrepresented in all of these studies that I mentioned, and I want to understand if religion is as important to young African Americans as older African Americans. I want to understand if uh, they utilize professional mental health services as a way to cope with depression. And I also want to understand if hobbies are something that they use to cope with the depression. Okay, so let's talk about coping mechanisms for a second. To define coping, coping was defined in one of the studies that I found as a process in which cognitive or behavioral efforts are made to manage specific internal and or external sources of psychological stress. Okay, there are two categories of coping: maladaptive, and adaptive. Adaptive coping strategies are when the person um, they identify the stressor and you and participate in activities or strategies to relieve the stressor, such as exercise or meditation or anything like that, sleep maybe. Now, maladaptive coping strategies, they kind of ignore the stressor and participate in activities that can kind of increase, or I guess mainly decrease the feelings that the stressor provides, such as, for example, drinking or smoking or any type of risky behavior like that. For instance, if somebody is pressed or stressed and gets drunk, yes, that once they're sober, the whatever that causes stress is still going to be there. So they just kind of focus on more their feelings and put the stressor to the side instead of trying to eliminate or deal with the stressor head on. One study that I found showed that looked at depression in youth found that 70% of participants use maladaptive coping strategies, while 29% use maladaptive coping strategies. And they also found that adolescents with lower self-esteem use of avoidance, which is also going to be another word for maladaptive coping strategies. And those who use more avoidant coping strategies had less healthy eating behavior. So maybe one way that they cope is poor eating or eating unhealthy food. However, this study was a majority of the participants were white, so they didn't really have as many African American youth. So you can, so yeah, and however, another study found that depressed Black youth use more avoidant coping mechanisms because of the distress of discrimination. So it's interesting to see how these studies, how they compare and contrast. Okay, so the next portion of my literature review is called Stigma from Professional Mental Health Services. Um, African Americans are, it is said that some research says that African Americans show less symptoms of, less depressive symptoms, and they have a better mental health care status, while others said that the African Americans are actually underdiagnosed with depression. However, African Americans, one way that one reason why they might be seen as better, have better mental health services, or one reason why they might be underdiagnosed is because they don't use professional mental health services as much as whites. Actually, the number is less than 10%. One reason why is because they feel shame and fear for asking for help and want to handle their problems themselves. But one reason why they might be underdiagnosed and seen as having better mental health status is because they show their depression differently. They actually show it. There's some research says they show anger instead of sadness. Um, so they might be underdiagnosed because they just show it differently. So they might actually be more or the same amount of depression. It just not seen. It's not shown the same. One study showed that Black adolescent boys, when they studied them and asked them questions about how they cope with depression. They said that expressing their sad moments was seen as showing signs of weakness and can be seen as soft or gay. While another study showed that interviewed and researched African American women, they asked them if they were ever dealing with or diagnosed with a mental illness, um how they cope with that, or what coping strategies they would use. And out of so out of, excuse me, out of a scale of 1 to 5, the mean score was 2.9 to the answer of probably seeking treatment. Now this isn't a low number particularly, but there are other answers that had higher scores. However, 80% of them said that they felt comfortable talking to a healthcare professional. And however, older women in the study said that they were more likely to indicate that they would seek treatment over younger women. And also, African Americans just generally have a general mistrust of the medical field. They feel that it's racially biased towards them, and there's a long history of medical field abusing and misusing African Americans. So that's one reason why they might not utilize professional mental health services as much. Okay, so religion. There's a lot of studies that point to religion as being a way that African Americans cope with depression instead of mental health care. These studies usually interview or they're synthesized usually largely older African Americans or middle aged African Americans. So I found that older African Americans have much more of a connection to religion than younger ones. And based on the study, if you look at the study that I talked about before, with the adolescent Black males, out of 10, only 2 of them said that religion was important to them. Now, this is a small study, but this is a study that was one of its kind. There's not a lot of studies that research youth. So, even though it's small, it's still substantial. The study that I talked about with older Black women, with Black women, it was shown that older Black women were significantly more likely to say that they use religion as a coping strategy. So my question is, if older women utilize religion and mental health services more, and African and younger ones are less likely to. There may be other ways that African American youth utilize. African American youth cope with depression if they don't feel comfortable um, they don't feel as comfortable utilizing utilizing professional mental health services, and they don't have a connection to religion. There may be other ways that they do. Which brings me to music and other extracurricular activities. There was one study that researched how adolescents and young adults use music as a coping mechanism. This study found that there was association with girls but not boys. Men are more likely to engage in emotional venting, such as anger and lashing out, while girls use music as a listening to music as a way to cope. Another study found that activities such as volunteering, sports, hobbies, hanging out, and going to the mall, listening to music, watching TV, and time in a room alone were significantly correlated with active accommodation and avoiding coping goals, which can be also understood as maladaptive and adaptive coping strategies. The study also found that family games, family time, and going to the movies were correlated with active accommodation and coping goals only. However, these studies, majority of the participants were white adolescents. However, one study um, that researched African American adolescents, they were found 5 ways that they said they cope with depression, and one of them was called joining in with others, which was when they sought out and participated in social activities. Okay, so my methodology was that I performed a chi-square analysis, and with depression or depressed as a dependent variable, and religiosity, counseling, and hobbies as independent variables. Now, religiosity can be understood as religion being important to them versus not being important to them, and counseling as ever seeking counseling versus never seeking counseling, and hobbies as ever participating in hobbies and never participating in hobbies. Depressed as ever being depressed or never being depressed. I performed a logistics regression with all those same key independent variables, and including sex and household income as the control variables. My sample size was 973 people, and these people were African American, people who identify as African American between the ages of 15 and 24. The reason why I chose 15 to 24 because that is defined as the ages of youth. um, Questionnaire was used as for this data, secondhand data, and the reason why I picked these key dependent variables is because um, I wanted to piggyback off, I guess, for lack of better words, the to understand if religiosity was or wasn't correlated with depression in youth, understand if if they do utilize counseling or not, and also understand that there might be other ways um, that they cope with depression that is not often researched or looked at, which such as hobbies. So my results is I found that religiosity was not statistically significant in my study. Not saying that religion was not used as a coping mechanism. It's just that this variable there was no correlation at all either way. Hobbies, there was no correlation with hobbies either, but I did find a correlation with counseling. Counseling was statistically significant with in depression, and it was found to have a statistical significance in that the odds of counseling having an association with depression as opposed to not have association um, with depression, or as counseling being used as a coping mechanism, is 223%. And this relationship remained stable as sex and household income were included in the analysis. So my conclusion is that counseling was the only variable that effective was had association or was statistically significant with um, depression or seen as a coping mechanism. Religiosity and hobbies did not matter. This challenges previous research that African American youth do not utilize, or African Americans in general do not utilize professional mental health services as much. They I found that participants who are not depressed are statistically more likely to attend counseling, while those who answered that they are depressed are less likely to attend counseling. So it says that counseling has an effect on the depression level. Now back to the statement I said before. I didn't research if African Americans. This doesn't show that African Americans do or don't. If the levels or the percentage of African Americans utilizing depression is large or is compares to whites, is just saying that the ones who do, whether it's a small or large number, it actually works for them. So so maybe if since a large number of African Americans don't feel comfortable with utilizing the professional mental health services or don't have access to another, we know that it actually does help. Maybe we can utilize utilize resources to create programs for African American youth to utilize professional mental health services, or make it easier, or make it give them more access to it, because it's showing that research is showing that suicidal rates and depression is going up, and this research shows that counseling does help work for the ones that do use it. So maybe there needs to be more ways that we can give them more access to this, and also let them know that there is some that it can possibly work for some of them. Thank you.